Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Ed Miliband lost the general election for Labor in no small part due to this photo of him eating a bacon sandwich. Do you blame the man? Now, let's get more details from Stacy.
Yes, look closely at that photo again. He looks... That tastes like David Cameron. So this is the big scandal here in the United Kingdom. It's hashtag Piggate.
Piggate!
Yes. And the interesting story about this is not just the difference between US and UK sex scandals. In the US, it usually involves consenting adults. Here in the UK, it either involves children or animals. And there's a big story across the UK that broke this weekend, late Sunday night, which is that, broken by Lord Ashcroft, by the way. And this is the interesting thing about it, is Lord Ashcroft was a major party donor to the Conservatives. And apparently he got very angry, according to the Daily Mail, that he was not given the job promised in exchange for giving all those donations to the Tory party. And lo and behold, information was revealed about David Cameron during his days at Oxford or Eton or one of those sort of boys' school thing. And anyway, there's some sort of allegation that he did something with the pig, a sordid thing.
Well, allegedly, Lord Ashcroft has a photo of a dead pig performing fellatio on the Prime Minister David Cameron during his days at Oxford University. Now, if that's true, then that photo could be used for blackmail, and that is a genuine security threat.
Yes.
Now, we mention this because when Jeremy Corbyn was elected leader of Labour, Prime Minister David Cameron said that he was a security threat for no particular reason other than he hates and has contempt for democracy. Now we find out that there is allegedly a photo of David Cameron having sex with a dead pig. This is worse than the Westminster MPs having sex with children and then killing them, which is another scandal.
I'm not sure. I think actually those are worse, but here is a guy who is the leader of the country, and it is, you know, that sort of information in your past would disqualify you from getting, you know, government clearance, security clearance in the United States, even if you have a simple affair with a consenting adult.
This is a genuine security risk if this photo exists, and I stand corrected. Of course, the murder of children after raping them by Westminster politicians, of course, is a much more heinous crime than the Prime Minister allegedly having consensual or non-consensual oral sex with a dead pig. I mean, the pig was dead by the end. He could have choked to death. I mean, he could have been alive when it started. We don't know the details.
Actually, before this story broke, our theme of our show is going to be the Norman Bates sort of syndrome that we see across politics, but also across economics. This notion that you are the thing that you claim to hate or fear or be or whatever. So here, like, David Cameron is the national security threat. It's not Jeremy Corbyn. As far as we know, Jeremy Corbyn hasn't done anything with a dead animal. But in terms of monetary policy this week, we've seen the same thing, a Norman Bates sort of syndrome. Is the stock market holding Janet Yellen hostage? Normally, the financial markets dance to the tune of the all-powerful Federal Reserve, but now the tables have turned. The Fed's decision last week to delay raising interest rates was caused, at least in part, by turmoil in the financial markets. So she, in her own press conference, after deciding to hold interest rates in the United States at 0.25%, conceded that it was in part due to foreign stock markets and stock market instability. And JP Morgan about this says, it's not just that they're being held hostage, they've actually volunteered to be hostage to the market, said David Kelly, Chief Global Strategist at JP Morgan.
Well, as we said on the show, there was a 99% probability that rates would be left unchanged. In fact, there's probably going to be now quantitative easing part 4 because there's $200 trillion worth of debt in the world. And even a quarter-point rise in interest rates would increase the debt service cost by $500 billion. That's $500 billion that would be immediately taken off the global bond market. So they have no choice but to continue quantitative easing. They're going to go to negative interest rates. And the point is that markets are holding Janet Yellen hostage, but that's been true for a while. That's been true since Alan Greenspan started this idea of the Greenspan put, this idea that markets can constantly be bailed out by actions of the Federal Reserve. Once they failed to reverse those actions back in the 1980s and early 90s, then the markets themselves became the hostage taker of the economy, and they became these gross monstrosities that were holding a gun to the head. So these terms like too big to fail, too big to jail, too big to manage now, it's completely unmanageable. And this is only going to mean more quantitative easing and greater disruption.
But at least during Alan Greenspan and Ben Bernanke's days, there were still 0% interest rates to get to. They were coming down from 7, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So now what they're saying is that Janet Yellen is backed into a corner where it's just her and the markets, and they are reflecting each other. They are the same thing. There's no difference between the Fed and the markets. She is sitting there in a bad wig pretending to be not the markets, but she is the markets, and she's responding to this market instability. As this article points out, the irony is that the Fed seems to be helping cause some of the market turbulence that is keeping it from raising rates. Quote, "We are concerned about this vicious cycle in which more market volatility leads the Fed to delay, which in turn causes more volatility," said Roger Aliaga Diaz, senior economist at Vanguard.
But that's been true. Going back to the Bernanke-Greenspan, every time they talked about raising rates, the market would react. It would come in, it would fall, and then they would take that option off the table. And so that's been true, really, for quite some time now. But it's obvious at the zero level that the policy choices are going to have to become extreme. And again, when Jeremy Corbyn, who's been elected the leader of the Labour Party here in the UK, is described as extreme, well, it's the pot calling the kettle black, because on the other side of the aisle at the Bank of England now is talking about taking interest rates to zero. That is extremism. That's monetary extremism that will cause a continuation of economic disruption.
Actually, we're going to go into that in the next episode of Keiser Report, what the Bank of England is saying. In fact, they're going beyond, way beyond 0% interest rates. They're going to negative. They're going to banning cash. They're proposing radical extremist measures. And what David Cameron accuses Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, his shadow Treasury Secretary, of being, extremists in terms of wanting QE for the people. And what David Cameron instead is doing is QE for the banks, more and more QE for the banks. And again, that's the Norman Bates sort of syndrome. But staying with David Cameron and his notion of being like this, this Norman Bates sort of psychotic character who is the very thing he charges his enemies with being. Here is a story from this weekend also. From Reuters, U.S. reports 17 airstrikes against Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And as the theme is Norman Bates, I get to refer to a tweet from myself. Here is a tweet from myself. Norman Bates strikes again. 81% of Syrians and 85% of Iraqis think U.S. created ISIS. So here we have the U.S. and UK striking Syria in order to destroy ISIS, when the Syrians themselves think America created ISIS. So they must be looking at us like we are absolute Norman Bates in the cheap wig, like running around like a psycho.
Well, that's obviously the case. The refugee crisis is created by the U.S. and her NATO allies, including the United Kingdom, killing people in the same spurious, thoughtless manner. They are psychotic. They are genuinely extremist and dangerous. And you're right that when Cameron calls Corbyn extremist and dangerous, he's a self-hating extremist. At least some of these suicide bombers believe enough in themselves that they're going to go to a better place. But here you have a self-hating suicide politician who's committing political suicide for himself and his country by revealing all these photos of these bits from college in a way that it shows a lot of self-loathing, which is really hard to live in a country where everyone in this country deeply hates themselves and the fact that their leaders engage in porcine fellatio
So let's go
antics.
back into the economics of this, because this is the war machine, and the Daily Mail was also covering the fact that John McDonnell believes we have a war machine. And I believe you're speaking to the artist taxi driver who made that film, The War Machine, interviewing John McDonnell, which he got in trouble. Now, John McDonnell is the shadow chancellor of the Exchequer, and Jeremy Corbyn appointed him, and he's a socialist, he's a Marxist, and he was on the UK state television, the BBC, on one of their flagship shows called Question Time. And you had this bizarre Norman Bates sort of situation there. So for the first few minutes of the show, it was dedicated to a quote from the 1990s of John McDonnell, basically praising the IRA for bringing everybody to the negotiation table through violence. So they were demanding that he renounce his support of violence. And then, without any sort of sense of the contradiction, none at all, they then went on baying the panel and the audience, baying and demanding that he support NATO, Trident, and the expansion of the UK military. So they were demanding he renounce violence and then demanding he continue violence. So it was like they couldn't see this contradiction in their entire screaming and shrieking and squealing like pigs at John McDonnell.
Yeah, again, the audience on BBC Question Time. By the way, BBC has failed to mention Piggate yet today.
Yeah.
They're waiting for instructions from the Queen. The Queen hasn't woken up yet on Monday morning. So as soon as she wakes up, she'll be like, "Hello, it's the BBC. This Piggate thing, you gotta put out a story slamming all the people who suggested that David Cameron likes to have sex with dead pigs, and we'll blame them. We'll blame, because we're self-hating Brits. We hate ourselves, and we hate everybody in the world, and we're gonna blow everybody up, and we're suicide politicians. I'm the Queen!" And then David Cameron will take that call and say, "BBC, tell everybody that who called me a fellatio-loving piglet that they're got to be bombed to death. We're gonna get NATO to bomb them." And then the BBC will report on that, and then American media will report on that. CNN will report on that. They'll do it in these dulcet British cut glass tones, like everything is fine with our pig prime minister. Let's all praise God and sing out to the Queen. And this whole 1,000-year nightmare
Of course, yes, they have to continue singing the national anthem.
I love George Washington more every day. We gotta go.
Oink, 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 oink.
Stay tuned for the second half. A whole lot more. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Mark McGowan, a.k.a. the artist taxi driver. Mark, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Hey, great to come back.
All right, now the big story, it's breaking, it's huge. This scandal involving David Cameron, allegedly, there's a photo circulating of him having sex with a dead pig. And isn't this a security risk? In other words, when Jeremy Corbyn came into power, the Conservatives very quickly said, this is a security risk. But if there's a photo floating around of this, it's for blackmail purposes. I would think that that is actually a real security risk, not a fake one that Cameron is talking about in terms of Jeremy Corbyn. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's stunning, isn't it? It's absolutely stunning.
You famously did something.
It's just gone smash like that, hasn't it? It's just gone. The prime. Just breathe and think about it. The Prime Minister of the entire country, the Queen's, Her Majesty, God save the Prime Minister, put his thing inside a dead pig's
Allegedly.
mouth. Allegedly.
According to who?
I think it's
Lord Ashcroft.
Lord Ashcroft has been told it by somebody, but you know, if you just for a moment think about what he put his thing.
I know, but Mark, is this really inconsistent with the temperament of Westminster?
Mouth.
Because in the past year,
the context of it is, at the same time, Jeremy Corbyn was fighting against apartheid. He was out marching. He was out protesting. There was 20 years they was outside South Africa House. This man was putting his thing inside a dead pig's mouth and talking about hanging Nelson Mandela, who was a terrorist. This is the context, because what they've been doing with Jeremy Corbyn is going back in time. This is a man of peace, a man who stood up against, he's standing up against war. You know, he's anti-nuclear, anti-trident, anti-war. He wants no more pointless wars, anti-austerity. You know, he wants free education, renationalising railways, energy, not-for-profit homes. They want to destroy him, you know, because he's even like this quantitative easing, we called it before, it's like a helicopter dropping money, you know, the famous quote. But to even suggest it, you know, someone said to me in Scotland, if Jeremy Corbyn was to get within 10% of implementing any of these policies, they would. The general yesterday, what did the general?
Yeah,
Did you see the general?
let me put that in context. So first of all, Jeremy Corbyn, he's just recently been elected by a huge 60% mandate to lead the Labour Party. He was a 250-to-1 long shot just a few months ago. People finally have given up. They understand that this country has a bunch of inbred, kitty raping, pig sexing, Westminster career psychopaths, and they're worried now because they see the global economy about to crash. They see this global environmental degradation about to wash up on UK shores. They see the global debt markets about to explode, and they're thinking, do we really want a psychotic kitty rapists and pig fiddlers in number 10 Downing Street? They're saying maybe we should have somebody like a Jeremy Corbyn who seems to be, one, honest, 2, intelligent, and 3, forthright, unlike the current administration. Now, you mentioned this fella, a senior general, threatening a military coup in the United Kingdom if Jeremy Corbyn is elected prime minister. Now, here's the war machine. You made a film called The War Machine. No surprises then, I would think.
Well, I mean, we know, like, on the way here, I was listening, and there was refugees fleeing. They said, where are you from? They said, Iraq. BP, Reuters, it was out a couple of months ago, BP are extracting oil from Iraq in lieu of payments. We never get it on our news. In the middle of a war, people on fire, refugees, it's on our news every single day. BP are extracting oil. This is the war machine. This is what they're scared of. They're scared of interference because it's not foreign policy, Max. It's not foreign policy. It's economic policy. And people get confused by it. Because BP's extracting 3 million barrels a day from the Rumalia oil field, from Basra. Everyone knows that word, Basra, but they're extracting the oil. That comes into our economy. You know, when we buy our petrol, that's our tax. We pay tax for that. That goes to build our schools and hospitals. That's imperialism, that's colonialism, that's what they're scared of. What they're actually saying is a fact.
Who's been the biggest player in the Mideast cutting these blood for oil deals?
Yeah, but
Who?
Well,
Tony Blair.
Yeah, but
Tony Blair.
Yeah,
you know, it was blood for oil, and now the
but
so-called
what they're saying is a fact. What they're saying is a fact. You understand that? What the Tories, what the City of London is saying is a fact. Without debt, without destruction, without death, the global economy would collapse. It's built on it. Look at all the top the companies in the world. Arms dealers, oil extraction, mineral extraction, banks. They all fund this. This is how the economy is driven.
I know it's quite humorous that the UK is, if not the biggest, but one of the biggest arms exporters in the world, responsible for genocides and mass murders around the world. And you have someone like a Piers Morgan, who's a disgraced chat show host from America, now back in the UK, who tries to get into American politics by talking about the gun culture in America, never commenting on the fact that his country is the biggest mass genocidal arms exporter psychopath in the world.
But we have to concentrate on that question of British values. You know, that's what this is about. When you talk about Corbyn versus Cameron, that's what this is about, isn't it? It's about morals. Where do we get our morals from? If we're extracting oil while a country is on fire, millions of refugees, if we're doing, where do we get our morals? If he's putting his thing inside a dead pig's mouth,
allegedly,
poor pig.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Where do we get our morals from? Because what they're saying, because Jeremy Corbyn is a man of peace. No one can deny that. That's it. Whatever he's done as an MP, his primary purpose has been anti-war. So these warmongers, this war machine, the banks, oil, the arms. They want to destroy him. And what have they attacked the most? What have they attacked the most? His credibility as a security threat. You know, because what? Because he wants peace.
Yeah, well, exactly right. So NATO, he questions the role of NATO and how they were involved in Ukraine, for example. And now you famously, maybe not so famous, but should be famously, you interviewed actually the current Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, John McDonnell, as part of your film, The War Machine. And for those who haven't seen Mark McGowan's work, The Artist Taxi Driver, is readily available on YouTube. You are in your taxi and you're doing interviews with folks, and you've captured now some great interviews going forward, because a lot of these people are now, like John McDonnell, are now the Shadow Chancellor. So these are quite valuable journalistic documents that are now been recorded. So kudos for that. You also involved a couple of the Scottish MPs for the SNP that are now carving out
Mary
brilliant.
Black, Chris Law,
Brilliant.
Tommy Shepherd.
What about, so now, how do you think, I mean, the BBC is ignoring the story, presumably because they haven't gotten the word yet from the Queen what to say. They haven't gotten the script delivered yet at the BBC headquarters what to say about this scandal about David Cameron and Piggate, as it's being called. So, you live in this country. What can we expect from the BBC? Will they try to discredit the people who brought the truth to the fore, or how will they play it? Because they're obviously very corrupt.
Well, I think one of the things is you have to know there is some sort of like history between Lord Ashcroft and David Cameron. A lot of people say, no, it's because he didn't give him a position in the coalition. It goes a bit deeper than that. It's to do with Peter Cruddas, who is the richest man in the city of London. He's Lord Ashcroft's best friend, and David Cameron it was a set-up, and he cashed for honours. He said, £100,000, £200,000 for dinner with Cameron. You know, so it's the whole thing about the Tories is it's imploding. But what you have to think about is ask yourself, how can you get a British electorate that would vote for a prime minister that will put his thing, allegedly, inside a pig's mouth, over someone who was fighting against apartheid, over somebody who wants to build not-for-profit homes? Jeremy Corbyn wants to build not-for-profit homes. That scares them. Never mind quantitative easing. 28 billion every year goes in to private landlords. He wants to build David Cameron's got a home-owning democracy. You know, what about the poor people, the people that sweep the streets, the people that clean this building? If they don't come and clean the toilets in this building, Max, this building will not open. It will not open. Where are they supposed to live? Where are they supposed to live? Because we're in the middle of Southwark here, and they've been knocking down the Haygate, they knocked down the Aylesbury estate, and Boris Johnson and the Labour Council, they sold it to land lease. They sold it for something like 50 million, took them 44 million to clear the estate, and now it's worth 2 billion because they want the land. The people's quantitative easing, they're like, it wants a what? His idea is actually a little bit different from people's quantitative easing. He's talking about printing money, about taking money, which you can do, and build infrastructure, build schools, build hospitals, but we would ultimately own it. That's what he's talking about. It's a difference than giving it to private, let's remember, private corporations like banks. Banks were bailed out with money.
Just to be clear, Mark, these assets don't go to private corporations. They go to foreign state public pension accounts.
There you go.
So if the French and the Germans are taking money every time you use the transportation system in the UK, it goes to a public sector pension account in Germany who's sitting on a beach somewhere laughing at you because they're the ones who are now getting the cash, not you, and your pensions are being destroyed through 0% interest rates and other fraud committed by Bank of England.
But they are scared of Jeremy Corbyn. They're scared of his policies because his policies make sense. His policies are about a more fair and more equal society.
Well, it's just like, Bernie Madoff eventually was taken down. He's a Ponzi scheme operator. They eventually took him down, and the whole thing folded like a house of cards. If, in fact, Jeremy Corbyn gains some traction, and they go in and they examine this Ponzi scheme called the UK economy, and they start to dismantle it, that means the housing bubble crashes, all 4 major banks become insolvent.
Yeah, but how do you get through to the electorate when you have tax-evading billionaire media barons feeding them the most awful
Well, you
stuff.
have a state-sponsored media conglomerate, BBC, who is monopolizing the message and fails and is the least impartial network in the world, and they cover for the war machine, the fraud machine, and the pedophile machine. That's their role. If there was any competition in this country in the media space other than Artist Taxi Driver, Keiser Report, something that had even greater distribution, the people would have a chance to make informed decisions. But right now they're making decisions based on a steady stream of pig slop that's being jammed down their throat like a foie gras farm, and then they take out their livers and they sell it to some foreign investor, and they throw them into Potter's Field and urinate on them, and that's called David Cameron's Britain. All right, well, we're out of time. We gotta go. Any last word?
Well, I think that the way forward for everybody is to start to realise that it's over for the Tories. Do you know what I mean?
All right, it's over for the Tories. Mark, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report. That's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Mark McGowan, a.k.a. the Artist Taxi Driver. If you'd like to get in touch, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.